members and Madam Minister and officials. I'd like to welcome you here today for the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. My name is Ken Cheveldayoff and I'll serve as the chair this afternoon. Other members of the committee are Stephen Bonk, Fred Bradshaw, Noor Berkey, Terry Jensen, Dana Scorpad, and Doyle Vermette. Today we'll have Trent Weatherspoon substituting in for Noor Berkey. Before we begin, I'd like to table 3 reports from the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Council that identify any issues pursuant to Rule 147, subsection 2, that he found with regulations and bylaws filed in 2020, 2021, and 2022, and any steps that have been taken to rectify these issues. If the committee chooses, it may bring in the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Council to review these reports at a subsequent meeting. Those reports are CCA 43-29, Law Clerk and Parliamentary Council 2020 Report on Regulations and Bylaws, CCA 44-29, Law Clerk and Parliamentary Council 2021 Report on Regulations and Bylaws, CCA 45-29, Law Clerk and Parliamentary Council 2022 Report on Regulations and Bylaws. Today, the committee will be considering the 2024-25 estimates and the 2023-24 supplementary estimates, number 2, for the Ministry of Finance. Before considering the 3 bills and voting on the committee resolutions, we will begin with consideration of Vote 18, Finance, Central Management and Services, subvote F101. Pardon me?
FI01.
Oh, FI01, sorry. Minister Harpower is here with her officials. As a reminder to officials, please state your name for the record before speaking, and please do not touch the microphones. The Hansard operator will turn them on for you. Minister Harpower, please introduce your officials and make your opening comments.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Ministry of Finance budget. Our Deputy Minister of Finance, Max Hendricks, cannot be here today with us, but I have a number of other officials from the Ministry of Finance that were able to join me. I will ask them each to introduce themselves throughout our discussions when they answer a question. The Ministry of Finance Estimates Vote 18 begins on page 51 of the Estimates book. The Ministry of Finance's expenses budget is $404.27 million for 2024-25, an increase of $3.87 million or 1% from 2023-24. Our ministry's budget includes the following increases: $8.26 million for pensions and benefits, $2.69 million for new funding for the Saskatchewan Secondary Suite Incentive Grant Program, $1.2 million in new funding for the modernization of the Revenue and Financial Service Act, and $750,000 to increase our capacity to manage fixed income investment funds. These increases are partially offset by the following decreases: $7 million for the completion of the Saskatchewan Affordability Tax Credit, $1.5 million for the completion of research and analysis on corporate income tax design and administration, $335,000 for operational efficiencies, and $200,000 for the completion of the real-time validation system upgrade. The ministry's budget includes $700,000 in government-owned capital, which remains unchanged from 2023-24 to modernize the Treasury investment system used by the Provincial Treasury Office. Mr. Chair, allow me to elaborate on some of our ministry's budget highlights. With the largest ever increase in school operating funding, the largest ever increase in health funding, the largest ever increase in municipal revenue sharing, and the largest ever capital budget, this budget responds to the challenges of a growing province by reinvesting the benefits of a growing province. This budget allows the people of Saskatchewan to enjoy the benefits of growth through record investments in classrooms, care, and community. This year's Ministry of Finance budget supports strong financial management and accountability, helping ensure valued service, programs, and capital investments are sustainable today and into the future. The expense budget for the operations of the Ministry of Finance is $67.2 million, which is a decrease of $4.4 million or 6.1% from 2023-24. This is primarily due to the completion of the Saskatchewan Affordability Tax Credit Program. To help make life more affordable for Saskatchewan homeowners, in addition to the expanded provincial sales tax rebate on home construction, this budget includes $2.69 million in new funding for the Saskatchewan Secondary Suite Incentive Grant Program. It is designed to increase housing availability across the province and generate supplemental income for homeowners. The program provides up to 35% of the total price to construct a new secondary suite at an owner's primary single-family residence to a maximum of $35,000. To date, the ministry has received 62 applications and processed and paid 22 grants, putting $464,000 back into the pockets of Saskatchewan residents. To ensure a level playing field for tax-compliant businesses and ensure fair collection of tax dollars, $1.2 million is provided to support the modernization of the Revenue and Financial Services Act 2024. The new Act provides enhanced tools that may be used for those individuals and businesses who purposefully do not comply or ignore the Ministry of Finance's attempts to have them comply. $750,000 is provided to increase the ministry's capacity to manage fixed investment funds, such as the newly established Small Modular Reactor Investment Fund. This fund provides for an additional 3 investment professionals and annual subscription fees to support the new investment management system. In addition to operations, the ministry is budgeting more than $337.1 million for employer contributions to pensions and benefits plan for government employees, judges, and members of the Legislative Assembly. This represents an $8.26 million increase from last year and is based on actuarial evaluations and changes in compensation rates. Mr. Chair, this is just a sample of the important work the employees of the Ministry of Finance undertake every year, focusing on serving clients inside and outside of government. And with that, I would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Witherspoon, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Madam Minister, and thanks to all the officials that have joined us here tonight and all those that are connected to the important work that we'll be discussing here tonight. With respect to a reduction in the budget in the revenue division, I see there's a reduction of about $8 million. Can you explain what activities in the division are being cut or reduced and why?
Majority of it.
Thank you for that question. The majority of that, as I said in my opening comments, is the no longer having the Saskatchewan Affordability Tax Credit is the majority of that amount, but I will get the officials to add any other details.
Brent Hebert, Assistant Deputy Minister, Treasury Board and Personnel Policy Secretariat. Thanks for the question. So in addition to the decrease for the Saskatchewan Affordability Tax Credit, there's a $1.5 million decrease for the completion of the research, analysis and consulting advice on corporate income tax design administration, a $250K decrease for the reallocation of 2 FTEs to the budget and analysis for corporate income tax policy work, and a $200K decrease for the completion of the real-time validation system, and a $169,000 decrease to achieve the ministry's operational efficiencies that we've identified.
Thanks. Thanks for that information. Last year, the Treasury Management Group had a 32.2% increase in funding in 23-24. This year, 24-25, the same group's receiving another 32% increase. Can you explain why there's been two fairly significant increases over the past 2 years?
Thanks for the question. So the increase for the Treasury Management area, there's $300,000 for a half year of annual subscription fees for a new investment management system, and $450,000 for 3 new investment professional FTEs.
Okay, so just to be clear, the four new additional FTEs are being added to the Treasury division. Is that correct?
3.
3, sorry.
$450,000 for 3
Gotcha.
FTEs.
You identified earlier too some spending or some priority on the corporate tax side of things. While we're discussing the revenue divisions, is there any budget or plans in government to fund the development of the Saskatchewan Revenue Agency?
This time.
I will add to that. So we had undertaken research and analysis, which was the funding that was in last year's budget to contract the services of 2 independent expert consultants, one being CD Howe, which is a nationally recognized taxation and economic policy research organization, and the other is Kirk McGregor, a former finance assistant deputy minister with over 30 years of experience. As I had said to yourself and to the people of Saskatchewan, that this is an undertaking that we will thoroughly analyze before embarking to ensure that it is to the advantage of Saskatchewan people and Saskatchewan businesses, and that work is still underway. There isn't a budget, or there isn't an allocation in this budget for it, but that is because the 2 consultants that we have is still undergoing their work with the previous payment.
Okay, so you haven't, I mean, of course, we've talked about this, approach of your government here, duplicating the tax system and, ultimately increasing the cost of compliance for businesses across Saskatchewan, and adding an additional unproductive administrative cost to taxpayers' bill as far as costs. So you've identified that you've had some reports done on this. Have those concluded, or are those still underway?
They haven't concluded, and I'm actually surprised at the assumptions that you've concluded with. I have talked prior that there is some advantages to exploring this. We have found that the delay of the return or the data of the corporate income tax from the federal government through the CRA is problematic and extremely difficult to predict. And as such, it has been challenging in our budget process to plan what, or to project what the corporate income tax return will be. And there's about a 2-year lag of when we actually realize the dollars by having the federal government do the collection. More detailed data on each industry would help government make decisions on policy specific to each of the industries. And there have been times where the federal government has made changes to tax policy that isn't in the best interest of our corporations and our businesses here in Saskatchewan. And it's very problematic when you have them do the administration to make the changes that is in the best interest of our particular corporations. You also mentioned the onerous cost, which you're making assumptions that I'm not sure what you're basing that on. There would be, should we pursue this farther, but we are continuing to analyze the benefits and the challenges that might come with if making this move, should we do so. There would be, the IT costs, the upfront IT costs, and then of course employees for staffing the unit. But there's also cost savings. Saskatchewan is required to adhere to the criteria relating to income inclusions, deductions, and the number of tax rates, and it falls to the province to manually administer tax programs that do not adhere with the federal criteria, which results in higher administration costs for Saskatchewan and longer processing times. For changes that Saskatchewan would like made, and we have a number of incentive programs, as you're well aware, should CRA agree to make those changes, we have to pay them to do so. And the third is, right now the federal government retains all penalties and interest revenue imposed on Saskatchewan taxpayers. And if we were self-administration, the government of Saskatchewan would retain that revenue. So in conversations, in preliminary analysis, and we don't have a final report yet, and with conversations with Alberta, there is every reason to believe, beyond the startup costs, that this could be a revenue-neutral agency and not a cost drain, as you were suggesting.
Just the experience from other jurisdictions and accounting and public finance experts that we've had engaged on this, including local folks on that front, have really identified those concerns. I guess I'd be interested, are you able to provide to us a copy of the business case at this point?
One, as I pointed out before.
Do you have recommendations, preliminary recommendations? You have these are separate reports, one by the CD Howe and one by Mr. McGregor, certainly a well-respected leader in public finance.
I'm being informed that they will come concurrently, but they're separate reports.
But they're working
They will
together.
be separate reports.
Okay. Do you have some preliminary recommendations from them, and how long have they been engaged?
As I said before, we don't have any preliminary recommendations yet. They have been engaged since the contracts were issued in the summer and they began their work in the fall.
And the value of those contracts?
The what?
And sorry, the value of those contracts?
We have $1.5 million in last year's budget.
Is there money flowing into for those contracts and for other work on this front out of this budget?
And this budget, we already answered that. There is no money for this.
Just the resources of finance, to whatever extent you have your team working on it.
I'm being informed that we're not supplying any goods or services to this effort.
Yes, sure. With respect to, you touched on the startup costs, and you talked about the cost around IT. I'm sure those would be significant. Do you have any, some estimates built out in any sort of preliminary business case as far as startup costs and what those would include?
We have no preliminary numbers, as I said before.
What about anything on the compliance cost side? I know that's been one of the big concerns from the business community, those that farm, local businesses across Saskatchewan. When you look at the experience of, Ontario, for example, what do you have in having to submit a more complex return or two different corporate income tax returns? What have you assessed as the additional cost for local businesses?
The conversations I've had is with accounting, and it's been verbal conversations that I've had with accounting firms here in Saskatchewan that also do business in Alberta. And they've explained, because so much has gone electronically, and I know that you like to use Ontario, that discontinued this system some years ago, but it has changed on how we file. And they have assured me that it is quite simplified from years ago to what it used to be. And these accounting firms do files both in Alberta and Saskatchewan.
The input we've received, certainly through the business community and through the accounting community here in Saskatchewan, as well, including some of the firms is the challenge around compliance. The additional compliance cost is one piece, but you don't have an estimated cost right now for what the additional compliance, what that burden would look like from a cost perspective on local businesses.
No, I'll answer that for the third time, that we don't have any of those preliminary numbers.
You may not have that one then yet. Do you have how many FTEs would be required to run this Saskatchewan Revenue Agency?
No.
Because there's the start costs, and then there's the cost of all the staff, and then you're talking about tax experts and folks that you'd really, so then we need to make sure as well, of course, that if you're going to go about that you're even certain that you're able to recruit and retain those folks. Would, when you're looking at this, is the window that you're looking at on the revenue agency simply on corporate taxes, or are you looking at broader assessment or a broader role for them with other taxes?
At this point, we would only be looking at the corporate income tax, which is the same model as Alberta has.
Okay. Well, I was a bit surprised that the work continues when the facts sort of line up as something that I think really need not be a priority of government when there's so many priorities out there that beg the dollars and the resources of government, and something that certainly seems clear from the accounting community and the business community that is going to be burdensome by way of cost and process for local businesses. The minister knows our perspective on this. I guess my question to the minister is, at what point do you anticipate a decision point on whether you're going to continue to go down the path of extending resources and time and that of your ministry on this front, or at what point are you going to decide that this may not be the way to go?
I won't know that until I get more information from the analyst.
And when are those reports? You've paid for them, the dollars are out the door, there's no new dollars this year for them. When are those reports due?
I didn't give them a due date. I want all due diligence done for whatever time it takes them to do it.
Will those be public when they're...
No.
When will Saskatchewan people know what decision you've made on this front, whether to abandon this pursuit or to pursue it?
If we choose to explore pursuing it, we will be having that conversation and consultation with the business community at that time.
Okay. What's the feedback been that you've received from the Saskatchewan business community, if you were to characterize it on the whole?
On the change, and of course I've met with a number of organizations and business owners. They wanted to know the change, although it also came from the business community, in particular when the federal government made changes to the passive income, and that was sort of the beginnings of when we thought we should maybe explore if there was some advantage to doing this here in Saskatchewan, because definitely there was those in the business community that were impacted by the changes that were done to the passive income by the federal government. The business community generally wants to ensure that they're, kept in the loop per se, as the steps go, as we take a look at this, and they wanted us to thoroughly analyze it. They wanted to know what was the advantage to them, as well as what's the advantage to government. They also expressed concern not as much for the business as it was, is this going to be very costly for government? So they had much the same questions that you raised, and I've assured them that we will do our due diligence very thoroughly before we make any final decisions, and they will be informed along the way. I can say this, having been in business in the past, basically what I paid for my return to have an accountant do my returns really was dependent on how many schedules I had at that particular year, which varied and depending on the activity within my business of that year. And this would be similar. It would mean an extra schedules.
Okay. Well, thanks for being direct about this with the committee. We'd urge again. There's so many areas to focus resources and time and money on, and a more cumbersome, more costly process isn't the one that we would be pursuing. But appreciate the responses. We see that Ottawa is proposing changes to the capital gains inclusion rate. I'm just confirming that your government has no plans to follow suit or to piggyback those changes.
No. This is the point. We have no choice. We have no choice. My previous comments of now having our own agency wouldn't change us having no choice. But there are decisions the federal government makes that we have no choice.
What will the fiscal impact be of I guess the flow or the impact onto the provincial budget then?
That will have to thoroughly analyze as to what that would be. We suspect that the projection the federal government gave is very optimistic, that it won't be as high as that, and different analysts have said that publicly, that generally there will be the ability of certain corporations or entities to be able to structure their taxes differently, or the fear is, of course, that it will mean that there will be less investment than what's been in the past, or money will go offshore, and that's been expressed by different experts in the financial world.
Definitely heard some concerns about this sort of capturing a one-time event, say in the life of a business, or let's look to a farm. Could you describe what the impact of this would be on the agricultural community or on a farm in Saskatchewan?
Just on first blush, and my officials can add more if they want to. Going back to my experience of having a farm, I think where it'll mostly affect it is in the successorship of a farm, in having that farm passed on to a son or daughter is where it's going to be affected, or a structure where the farm, which is often the case, has structured his business in such a way that the sale of part of that farm is his retirement. That's how it's structured. So, and that's not going to be just farms, that's going to be many businesses that have structured themselves in such a way that that sale is the retirement.
Yeah, that's, I think, some of the concern that I'm hearing early on here is that it captures these one-time events, potentially the sale of that farm that, you know, has represented sort of, that's been the retirement plan for many many producers, many families across the province. Same for many local businesses, right? That, anyways, more questions, I guess, on that front. Shifting gears just a little bit. Can you advise on the total level for the provincial, total arrears level, sorry, for the provincial sales tax, as well as for oil and gas royalty payments, and the gas tax on 30, 60, 90 days basis on April 1st, 2024. So both on the PST, oil and gas and royalty, and also the gas tax on arrears for the 30, 60, 90-day basis.
Thanks for the question, member. So the oil royalties, oil and gas royalties, that's administered by ENR, so we don't have that number. For PST, the accounts receivable as of March 31st, 24 is a little over 77 million.
And the fuel tax?
Readily available, but I'm sure we can get it here.
how do the levels, you have the PST, I guess, you don't have the oil and gas number, probably have the fuel tax available. Do you know how those arrears levels as of March 31st, 2024 compare with previous arrears levels?
PST, at March 31st, 2023, the arrears level was at 73.8 million.
And we don't know the fuel one right now.
No, but we'll that for you here.
And I guess then just specific on the PST, since you have those numbers, but once you get the information, if you can, on the fuel tax as well, how much in tax arrears did you write off in the previous year, 23-24, for PST and the gas tax, and how much do you expect to write off this year?
Remind me which programs you're looking for?
PST and fuel.
PST and the fuel tax, if
Okay.
you...
So for PST, the 23-24 write-off amount was $1.9 million. And the fuel number was nil.
And do you know what it is, or do you have access to the oil and gas royalty, or is that something that would be over at Energy and Resources? Can you list for me the number of legal challenges that are filed against the province with respect to our royalty program, the PST, and fuel taxes, as well as any legal challenges with respect to the provincial corporate and business taxes?
So currently we've got 17 lawsuits across a number of the tax programs, those being provincial sales tax, tobacco tax, liquor consumption tax, and beverage container program. Anything income tax related would be through the CRA.
Right. Okay. Could you break out the 17 to those respective taxes?
Well, in terms of ongoing lawsuits that have been filed, we have the Canadian Pacific Railway, and of course that's across a number of taxes. I'm sure you're aware of that one. Crescent Point Energy Corporation, that's PST. We have a number of various oil and gas producers with respect to PST and well cementing. There's the Lac La Ronge First Nations, that's tobacco tax. Ochapowas Indian Band, PST. Precision Contractors Limited, PST. Ted James, PST. Jesse Trach, these are representatives for class action lawsuits, PST. GNR Resources, PST. Hatterian Brethren Arm River Colony, PST. 606215 Sask Limited, PST. John Husband, PST. Terrence Watney, Liquor Consumption Tax. Stacy Guy, Tobacco Tax. And Kelnick Restaurants Beverage Container Program. I think that'll add up to 15, and then there's a couple, in a couple cases, there's 2 lawsuits for the same company.
Thanks for that information. With respect to the decision around not collecting or remitting the carbon tax, of course, we've all been clear that we oppose both the federal carbon tax, but also oppose this unfair carve-out for Eastern Canada by the federal government. It's a real bad move, not fair. But we have to make sure we're understanding implications for Saskatchewan. Of course, the federal government's confirmed that the CRA will be pursuing full repayment of the carbon tax that wasn't collected and remitted to the federal government. The minister responsible under the legislation for the collection and remittance has said that the decision to not remit wasn't taken lightly, and he states that the provincial government recognizes there may be consequences. He's confirmed that Sask Energy is breaking federal emissions law by choosing not to remit the levy, therefore will have to repay the funds. I guess the question is, given that both the federal and provincial governments appear to agree that there's no legal questions as to the province's responsibility to repay the money, what is the financial liability that the province has accumulated to date?
We don't have that number, and I do think this could possibly end up in court.
So you must have there must be the number being collected around the liability.
Well, Sask Energy may have a number because they would know the customers and they would know, but that's in the Crown Corporation.
So then, will the expense and the liability for the last 3 months of 23-24 be recorded in the 23-24 public accounts that will be released in June? And how does that impact the deficit for that year?
The expense will only be recorded if we pay it. And then, depending on the timing of when should it be paid, then you would see that in the following quarter report.
It just seems that the minister has stated that there's agreement on the requirement of the funds. So I'm just wondering how you're tracking or booking that liability. Have you gotten advice from the auditor on this front?
The audit, not at this point. We have not.
Have you received any special advice from, I mean, you've got a very strong public finance team there at the ministry, or from any other public finance officials and public sector accounting leaders on how that should be booked or how it should be treated at this time?
The question becomes whether or not it is liability, because at this point in time, the federal government hasn't decided how they'll get paid.
It just seems that with the statements from the minister responsible, that there was some sort of an agreement that there'd be consequences and that dollars would have to be paid somehow. So I'm just wondering how we're properly accounting for that, that liability. And given that it's a growing known expense that's being accumulated into the 24-25 fiscal year, just wondering why there's no provision in the budget to account for that, that liability or how it would be handled.
In the Ministry of Justice, there'll be lawyers that will be looking into whether or not the federal government actually has a legal mechanism in which to collect it.
Is the minister concerned that it would seem that the budget, in not booking a liability, will not conform with accounting rules of the province if it's not identifying and booking a known expense?
We don't know that it's a known expense. There is reason to believe at this point that the federal government will probably have to change legislation or introduce legislation to actually collect it.
I would, I'd urge the minister, would the minister commit to undertaking engagement with our provincial auditor as well at this point in time on this matter to make sure that we're having a proper portrayal of our public finances, our budget, and doing our best to make sure we're protecting our public finances?
So the provincial auditor, I met with her this week. She'll be auditing last year's financial statements and our budget, which includes the fourth quarter of last year. So she is engaged in this.
And has she engaged specifically on this matter of a liability and expense as it relates to the remittance of or the dollars that that appears the governments agree are a requirement?
Provincial auditor is very thorough, and she engages in all of liabilities and expenses.
And so I guess just to be clear then right now, are you getting guidance that the say the last 3 months of the final fiscal year where this would have impact, that's the way that's been booked, or I mean it doesn't show up there, that's in accordance with public sector accounting standards?
I'm not getting guidance at this point in time, no.
Ultimately, it's in any of these matters, if we're stuck with a liability as a province, and if the public has to pay through their taxes for this cost, it has an impact for everyone in the province. So I would just really reiterate that we need to get this right, that it needs to be accounted for in an appropriate way, and that our public finances need to be protected. Otherwise, if we're just sticking the bill onto taxpayers through the tax system, the actual gains that we would hope to offer folks, the protections. I mean, the idea was to fix an unfair federal program, to establish some level of an agreement, to have some sort of a carve out that protects Saskatchewan people, ratepayers on this front, as well as obviously our public finances. And it's just concerning at this stage that there seems to be a high level of uncertainty on this front. So I would really urge the minister to be proactive with the interests of Saskatchewan people on this front. When I'm looking at some of the other, I just want to get a bit of a breakdown on some of the revenue items for government that aren't broken out in the budget, unless I missed them here. Obviously, we don't need to get into the whole debate tonight. We know where we stand on the tax hikes that have been brought in the last number of years. We've expressed our serious concern with the big tax hikes by your government. But what I have interest in getting an update on is to break out the current revenue collected on the areas where PST was previously exempt, where your government has applied it, where they've added it to, going back to 2017. So we can start with used clothing, children's clothing.
If I may, if you go back to what you've received in previous estimates, you would have it to date. We'll give you this year's.
Sorry?
You've asked this, I think, every year. You should have all of that information, and we'll give you this year's, the current.
Perfect. So if you can just provide, so if you just go through each of those items, children's clothing, construction labor, insurance, snack foods, used cars, restaurants, entertainment, if you could just break those out.
There. So before you, the list of course, exemptions are in the budget document. PST is not remitted by category. So a Walmart. So someone fills their cart, goes through the checkout. They may have children's clothes. They may have snack food items. They may have other items that PST apply. It's not broken out. So there's no way to give you actual numbers for what you're requesting.
So there must be on some of those categories. What about construction labor?
Again, it's one PST submission. They don't break it out to labor and supplies.
So you're not tracking at all. I had different numbers over the years that I've received as I've been trying to track. I mean, we know that we differ on this in a big way. We really thought this was a real gut punch to the economy when it was brought about, and we've been trying to quantify, obviously, the fiscal impact, but also the economic impact, but specific to the revenues that you're currently deriving on this front. You must be tracking this.
You're talking about an expansion of PST from 17-18, so we're not going to track that for, there was estimates given at that time, which of course made the base revenue for the provincial finances more stable. There's only 3 significant revenue streams for the provincial government in which to provide services in healthcare, education, and social safety nets, as well as build infrastructure. And it's taxation, federal transfers, and resource revenues. So changes were made in 2017-18 because resource revenues had gone down and remained down for a number of years. There was an estimate at that time of what additional revenue that would generate by expanding the tax base. And no, it's not going to be tracked for decades. That happened, well, 7 years ago now. And I understand that you believe that that would completely crash the economy, but it hasn't, and building permits are up.
Yeah, we don't need to get too far into the debate, but I think the record's pretty clear that the economic performance of your government during that period of time since has been really poor. And you know, we lay out regularly, if you look at certainly the GDP, sort of back of the pack in Canada, jobs back of the pack, the building permit piece, same deal. And you have to wonder why, what factors are at play there. And certainly as I chat with the business community and those that track competitiveness in the investment environment and securing capital and advancing the projects, they continue to identify that as a real challenge, and something that, of course, in the end, there was a number, I think, that was suggested by government when it was imposed, and many that I would hear from, that economists and those tracking this through the local business community would then point to the fact that we just haven't met the GDP targets and goals, and that we've been back of the pack in the country as a result of this choice and possibly others. And so then you've just got lost. The revenues that were projected were never realized, and what we have is actually less people working, less projects moving forward. But if you're not tracking it, you're not tracking it. We're continuing to engage in that conversation, just really looking to all the ways that we could, you know, enliven this economy and get as many people working and make sure those jobs are there for everyone across the province. And importantly, make sure that we don't have, you know, a competitive barrier or challenge with those, you know, to the south of us or those to the west of us or our neighboring jurisdictions. With respect to insurance, that must be one. It was imposed on insurance. That must be quite straightforward to assess what you're collecting by way of additional dollars on that front. Could you provide the insurance number for this year?
Well, the officials are seeing if they can find that number, if it does exist. I need to sort of comment on your preamble. The economic indicators performed very well in 2023, and the year where we had a challenge was when we had the largest drought in the history of the province, and it displayed how important agriculture is for our province. And I don't think a drought is the fault of a government, any government. But the indicators from 2023, employment reached 592,500 in 2023, which was an all-time high, and up 10,700 jobs from 2022. The value of building permits totaled $2.4 billion in 2023, which was up 11.4% from 2022, which was the second highest growth rate among provinces. Investment in building construction totaled $4.8 billion in 2023, which is up 4% from 2022, the third highest growing rate among the provinces in 2023. Housing starts totaled 4,619 units in 2023, which was up 9.7% from 2022, which was the second highest growth rate in the province's retail sales totaled 25.2 billion in 2023, an all-time high, up 0.5% from 2022. Sales in food, services and drinking places totaled nearly 2.4 billion in 2023, an all-time high, up 10.5% from 2022. So although you seem to see nothing but doom and gloom in our province, our government sees opportunity and growth.
I think your government sees more taxes, and I think people are paying the price, and very optimistic about this beautiful province and all those that make it such. But the heavy taxes that have been added have certainly hurt industries. The economic results are poor, assessed, I guess, under a premier's tenure from 2018 to current. Back of the pack, and Saskatchewan people deserve have the opportunity fulfilled. But the questions, let's just stay more focused, is how much on the insurance, and then it should be straightforward as well to be able to break out on restaurants and then on used cars and recreation.
So thanks for the question, member. So for restaurants for 23-24, we've got an estimate of 146 million. Insurance is 198 million. And used vehicles is 109 million.
Recreation, thank you very much.
Broken out.
Is that something you're able to get back to us, or?
No, it's the same situation with respect to the reporting of PST.
Okay. Thanks for the information. Moving along a little bit, I just want to get a better understanding of some of the money that's moving to SaskPower. In your budget, you announced that retroactively effective to January 1, 2023, the electricity carbon tax payments made into the provincial OBPS program will be deposited into the GRF and will be dedicated entirely to priorities that help manage an affordable and reliable electricity transition. But after that announcement, you said that SaskPower's corporate capital tax and usage-based payments to the GRF will also be dedicated to clean electricity transition priorities. Can you just explain what other usage-based payments refer to?
We need some officials here for this answer. But SaskPower's annual usage-based payments amount is equal to 1% of the gross revenues from all accounts of customers in Saskatchewan for supply of energy, not including exports.
So that's what they refer to. How much money will be collected through the usage-based payments in 24-25?
30.4 million.
And then how much, I mentioned the corporate capital tax that was identified as well. How much will SaskPower pay in corporate capital tax in 24-25?
50.8 million.
How does that compare to previous years?
You would have to ask SaskPower.
You collect, the Ministry of Finance collects it though, do they not? It flows in.
It's consistent. There's
Okay.
goes with their expansion in the power grid, depending on the growth of the province.
And the change then is where these dollars flow afterwards as to, as being different to previous years, correct?
Correct. Instead of being in the GRF, it's going to go into this fund.
And so previously those dollars would have flowed to the GRF and then could have been deployed for whatever purpose of government, healthcare, education, debt retirement, but now they're dedicated directly to the fund.
To this fund, and this fund is twofold. 50% of the fund will go back to SaskPower in order to maintain low power rates going forward, and 50% will go in a dedicated fund that will be identified so that it's transparent for future expense for greening the grid, to help keep rates down into the future as we move towards greening our grid.
So in this case, this year, roughly 90 million, 45 million going one way, 45 million going into the fund. I guess could you explain the accounting treatment of the money in the fund when it's transferred from the fund to SaskPower? So once it's in the fund, then once it's transferred to SaskPower for the construction, I think right now the government's focus with those dollars seems to be SMRs. And the question would be, will it be a grant to SaskPower? Will it be an equity injection to the company? How will it be treated at that point?
And the grant is
Actually, I have to correct myself. So the output-based performance standards cost is what is split 50-50. The SaskPower corporate capital tax and the SaskPower usage-based payments goes into the fund for future cost of greening the grid.
The kind of what the SMR fund that's been referred to, is that right?
Correct, and that's in the environment. And they're managed by who? When you asked about how the 50% of the OBPS is a grant back to SaskPower.
Okay, so that's from the fund, the fund that's been built out. Well, just to be clear, so the 50% goes, and this is the transfer that goes directly to SaskPower. That is a grant, and then the question I have is, and we've now established that the 90 million being collected this year in the usage-based payments and the corporate capital tax, the 90 million goes directly into that other fund. And then my question on the accounting treatment is when those dollars then flow back to SaskPower at some point here, will it be a grant or will it be equity injection at that point? How will it be treated?
We don't know yet. Right now it'll be a definitely identified and transparent fund. There's no, I mean, we're quite public that we're exploring the possibility of small nuclear reactors. Should that be pursued, I envision, but no decisions have been made, that would help with the capital cost of that. So it would depend whether we have a partnership with the First Nations or, because that's also being explored as to where that money would flow to help with the capital cost. Because the more you can bring down the capital cost of future projects that will green the grid, the cheaper that you can offer that power.
So those dollars may go to like a third party of some sort. They may not flow back. So they may not be a grant back to SaskPower. They may not be an equity injection. They could go to someone else entirely.
Yeah, well, we don't know right now I mean, technology isn't even there for the small nuclear reactor. It's exploration at this point, but we're getting close. And it may be the government's position, capital position in a small nuclear plant. It may be something else. But it is absolutely preserved for future green power.
My understanding on the exploration of SMRs, obviously there needs to be a heavy assessment on the actual capital costs and the feasibility, lots of other questions as well on any other power generation pieces. They're very capital intense though, without a doubt. Everything I had received to date was that those would be, if they were to be pursued, if they were in the best interests of the public, is that they'd be owned by SaskPower. It seems I'm hearing something different here today, that dollars being put away could flow to someone outside of SaskPower, to an independent or private operator.
I don't think that's even thought about right now, but there is some thought and some interest from some First Nations of being a partner.
Okay. Do you know what what kind of model you're looking at as far as on the ownership side there, what that would look like potentially?
No, not at all at this point. I mean, face it, this is years out yet.
So and right now, so you're taking the 90 million out of these two fees that we talked about, or the usage payments and the corporate capital tax. Those were 90 million that were available to be deployed to the goals of government or needs of the province through the GRF before. Those are now being dedicated to the fund as well. Does the minister concerned about the pressures that places on being able to fund the other priorities of government, healthcare, education, cost of living, all these other services. And like, is this another situation where the government's putting themselves in a situation where it's going to be revenue short and again, looking for another revenue increase somewhere, tax hike again?
No, and this is where it gets really confusing when you talk about cash and summary financials. This was always in the summary financial statements, so it always was income and will remain income in a summary financial ledger. And when you are expanding in healthcare, education, and social safety nets, you actually need cash. And we are actually in a fairly strong cash position. This doesn't change revenue in that it was revenue before in summary financial statements.
It's revenue, but it's dedicated to a fund with a purpose that will grow through some time and then potentially be discharged. Well, I don't know what that will look like, but potentially all at once. You know, so in the summaries, I don't know what that looks like as well, and that might depend on how that the accounting treatment to how those funds will then be deployed. So that's where I was trying to get a sense of, you know, what this, you know, what this actually means.
It means every budget is a balance within the fiscal situation of the province at that day. With each and every budget, you have to balance, and I would be or am concerned that there's no year in the future where suddenly you can have one huge expense for greening the grid, and I think it's wiser to slowly accumulate that money so that there's not a huge impact in one given year or a huge shortfall. Should there not be money put in place for future expense of greening the grid, because it will cost money, then you'll have a shock of power rates at that given time, which is what we're trying to cushion the consumers from.
Well, certainly it's an area that I think that needs to be explored and understood just further as we move forward, because an accumulation of dollars in a fund and then those dollars flowing out of that fund in a one-year event would certainly, from an accounting perspective, I believe, put you in a large so-called deficit situation in that year when those dollars are then deployed. And of course, dollars are dollars, so there's choices with them. They can go into a fund. They could actively pay down debt right now in Sask Power. They could go to other needs of government. They could keep costs low for people. So it's all about choices and just really trying to get a sense of how these are going to be treated. I don't get a. I mean, I've been clear that it seems that you're less than certain how they'll be treated from an accounting perspective, or how they could be discharged. So I mean, at this point, I think I'll move along to a couple of other areas. Watching the time, I might come back to it. With respect to some of the revenue forecasts, I believe you've responded in the past to the media that, for example, on potash, revenues are forecast that the government relies entirely on the potash companies to set those forecasts. Is that correct? Are your forecasts for potash entirely based on the input of the potash companies?
Get my official, who is the guru in this area. You have to introduce yourself.
Cullen Stewart, Assistant Deputy Minister, Fiscal Policy Division with the Ministry of Finance. So the resource royalties and production taxes forecasts are a combination of tools. So the primary mechanism through the potash system is to work directly with data from the companies and from their input in terms of their forecasting. There is also, though, market intelligence that's done in terms of looking at market fundamentals for agricultural products, looking at inventory buildups, in some cases looking at some of the competitors and what's happening in those production areas, as well as private sector experts that provide forecasts in these fields. So it's a combination of multiple tools, but certainly data and insights from the producers is important in that.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification because I think there were some comments that it's entirely based on the companies. We got exceptional companies in this province, and they play such an important role in getting potash to the world and feeding the world and employing people and the investments they make. But they have a different fiduciary responsibility than that of the government, and theirs is to their shareholder. And so I think it's critically important to take information and have a very good, transparent flow of information. But it's prudent and required to have other public finance and forecasters involved in that exercise, and I'm hearing that that's the case. It's a combination, is what you described.
Third-party expert organizations that specialize in forecasting commodity prices, we take those into account as well.
Thanks so much. Who are you relying on that front? I think we know the players, but
I'd have to pull the names from our folders for you. The potash is very technical. It wouldn't be companies you'd be familiar with. The oil tends to be the major banks, and then a few of the major market players that are probably names you're familiar with.
Are you able to provide that information maybe not during the next, what do we have here, 40 minutes, but in the subsequent days back to us?
Yeah, we can provide that. I believe we already have a lot of that public.
Thanks so much. Looking at the forecast for the out years and the forecast for 2027 and 28 seem to suggest that there'll be that not only will the operation of BHP have no impact on the price of potash, but the price of potash will be higher in those years than it is today. And I'm just wondering if that makes sense. Of course, we've got this very important industry. We've got a big new market entrant. It's wonderful to have BHP making these investments and producing, but what you're talking about is bringing significant volume of new production online. I would assume they're not going to be fully productive right from the start. In fact, they've talked about scaling up, but at some point they'll have 8.5 million tons. So I'm just looking to the 27 and 28 years with forecasts of increased prices and wondering if that makes sense or if that's incorporated BHP's entrance into the market and the new production they'll have, the new volume that they'll have be putting into the market.
With respect to the out years of the forecast, the global demand for potash is growing quite substantially in Latin America, in Asia, even in Africa, and our onshore markets are quite strong here in North America. So in terms of being able to absorb the output from new mining production in Saskatchewan, I think the global markets are going to be ready for that in the future. There's certainly strong demand. And that's what the companies are making these, 100-year investments based off of.
Thanks so much. Can you speak to what other assumptions are behind the price forecast for potash? For instance, does the forecast assume the awful and unforgivable war in Ukraine? Does it factor that in as continuing, and then some of the market implications with respect to Russia and Belarusian potash? I mean, it's a concern that, and what we're hearing, I think, is that those markets are those countries are getting their product to market, which is a concern to no end. but I just want to have a sense of how you factored in those external factors into your forecasts.
With respect to resource commodity forecasting, you're always looking at the supply side. Who are your competitors? What does the market access situation look like? What is the potential pricing environment? In this case, as you mentioned, Russia and Belarus have now been able to return to pre-war export levels, but there are restrictions in a number of major economies, and there obviously has been disruptions to some of their export platforms and trade routes. So they are selling at a discount into the market. And so that's factored in. Potash in particular, but oil as well. There's large inventories around the world, so inventory levels are very important to be mindful of, and both in terms of what that means on the potential pressures on supply or release valves, if you will, and on the demand side. And then, of course, there's the demand fundamentals that you look at in terms of what are the major markets that you're active in, and what are the underlying pricing fundamentals in those markets, inventory, and potential for those markets to grow, to take more product. So across any sort of analysis of geopolitics, you'd be looking at, as an exporter, what is the impact on your markets, on your trade routes, and on your competitors, and be taking that into account.
No, thanks for that. I was wondering, if you could be, just how you're factoring in those aspects into the forecasting situation. And obviously, I guess we'd urge the world and buyers of potash around the world to those that are dealing with Russia and Belarus to wake up to the reality that of the devastation that's being caused right now. And Saskatchewan obviously should be the world's the world leader, and we are when it comes to potash, and securing those markets is incredibly important. Looking on the oil side a little bit, Trans Mountain coming on online this spring, finally. Of course, that's been important. The capacity is pipeline capacity, export capacity is very important. Can you describe what fiscal impacts that has for Saskatchewan and WCS?
Thanks for the question. With respect to the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, it will be bringing on approximately 600,000 barrels a day of additional export capacity from the Western Canadian region, which is an integrated oil production zone when you think about transport networks and markets. This is really beneficial because first and foremost, most pipeline systems have been full in Western Canada for a long time. The rail system has certain limitations in terms of cars, crews, and then obviously it's competing with other sectors that also rely on the rail network, like agricultural, potash products, so on and so forth. So the extra capacity will be very positive in terms of pushing up the price of Western Canadian Select. The other fundamental aspect of Trans Mountain is that it will be pushing product into the Pacific Basin, which is the most lucrative oil market in the world, and diversifying Western Canada's supply options. So as more heavy oil moves from Alberta into the Pacific Basin, that opens up pipeline capacity for Saskatchewan producers as well, and that also gives a boost to the overall price of Western Canadian Select, no matter what market you're selling it into, because you have that diversity of supply or export options. So differential in our forecast is tight, compared to what it's been in past years. And so it's a combination of both the increased export capacity, but also where that export capacity is going.
I appreciate that very much. Over the years, this is a file that I've tracked regularly. Governments had interest in it, that whole the differential and fair value for our resource and opportunities for Saskatchewan on many fronts. And thanks for identifying the other transportations pieces around rail and some of those other logistics that hopefully can improve as well. I want to turn my attention to the economic forecast, Minister. Your government's showing job growth at a very tepid 8,400 jobs this year, which is based on approximately 600,000 jobs, is a growth rate of only 1.4%. But what's more concerning is that the number of jobs remains around that level in each of the next 5 years, real flat. How would you describe your long-term job growth?
Question. So you've identified that the province is expecting total employment growth of 1.4% in 24-25, and then that 1.4% growing out into the future. So this is economic forecast informed by private sector experts, and this is what they project is a growing labor market in Saskatchewan. So we've reached over 600,000, or will reach over 600,000 in total employment this year in Saskatchewan, which would be a new record for the province, and then continuing to grow from there in the medium-term outlook.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, the numbers are what they are. It's just it's pretty tepid growth, especially when you're looking at the period that we've come through from 2018 to this period, and where that's situated Saskatchewan people in our economy sort of last in the nation on far too many measures. So this is clearly an area of concern. People need good job opportunities and jobs that can pay the bills, especially with all the cost pressures around them. When you look at the budget, there's a shift where it continues to drop more economic analysis and statistics that used to be included within the budget. If you're looking at some of these measures, I think they add value for the public, such as retail sales, building permits. And I guess I'm just wondering, don't you think that the budget documents would be, that these would be added value for people to have their inclusion in the budget, added to, value to the public discourse, as well as just a bit of comparative analysis and analysis over a period of time, comparative to other provinces. And I guess just to give some recent examples of that data, I mean, the economy is certainly not as strong as it should be, as we've described. And there's, some of these points have been shared, certainly illustrated, certainly, for example, from the April 2024 statistical review, such as retail sales year over year, January to January from 23 to 24, is a negative 3.1% change in Saskatchewan. Now, Canada was up 2.5. Manufacturing sales, same period, Saskatchewan down -4. Value of building permits issued, and this is a forward-looking statistic, of course, but January 2024 over January 23, residential was down -46.2%. Commercials totally flat. I guess my question is, don't you think these sorts of statistics add value to the document, to the budget?
There are a number of agencies, including Stats Canada, where you can obtain statistics. And as I have found, just even listening to yourself and your fellow members in your caucus, statistics can be cherry-picked. It can be, if it's month over month is negative, that's the statistics that you will use rather than year over year. Is it seasonally adjusted for some numbers or not? So are we going to fill the document with statistics? The answer is no.
Well, I would urge the government to have a more fulsome presentation that includes the full set of results and then to compare them to other jurisdictions. And I think it's shorting Saskatchewan people of what they deserve to have to, engage in the public discourse and have a better understanding of the state of affairs in the province that we're all working to build. So I would urge that we should go in the direction of including those, not reducing that information as we've seen and cherry picking what's there, but actually providing a fulsome display, full state of affairs, and engaging people in that conversation. Then, just shifting gears a bit here. Maybe that, just on the employment piece again, is the budget really speaks glowingly about employment, but the results just don't match that rhetoric, right? And, what we see here is that 1.8% in 2023, 10,000 jobs, but employment numbers are interesting, and have you looked as well at, I think, comparing that to other jurisdictions, in all of Canada. Other measures as well, like the actual hours worked compared to other jurisdictions. And I guess to the minister, does the minister agree that growth needs to be put in perspective to others? So it's not just what we're experiencing as a province, and it's been tepid what we see, but you need to kind of look to what other provinces are experiencing. And the actual hours worked is also an important measure of the direction of the labor market, and that the growth in hours worked should be compared as well to, say, the Canadian average. And I would just share as a note, from 2017 to 2023 inclusive, so not just 1 month or anything, but that whole period, 2017 to 2023, total hours worked in Saskatchewan grew by 4.6 compared to the Canadian growth of 9.5%. Further, total hours worked in Saskatchewan from 2022 to 23 grew by 2.1%, while Canada grew at 3% I guess to the is the minister, is she concerned about this this lackluster performance on jobs, and does she see value in assessing some of these other measures of job performance?
Again, I see the member opposite seeing nothing but the downside in our province, when in fact there are jobs available and our population is growing, and people are coming here not because there's nothing to do, they have jobs to come to. With that, however, if you wanted to discuss job numbers and debate job numbers, I suggest that you should have done so in the respective ministry that it is incorporated in.
Well, I know our critics certainly engaged there as well, and we're certainly positive about what we need to build in Saskatchewan, what's possible here. But the foundation of the budget lays out a very stagnant economic forecast, and one that I think falls far short of extending the kind of opportunity that people are looking for, especially when we look at the record of the last number of years. If we're looking at provincial debt and looking at some of the decisions and choices that will be made in the next number of years, understand that during discussion of SaskPower's estimates, the following issue was raised, and that the minister previously suggested that SaskPower would be looking at up to 4 SMRs. He then suggested that SaskPower should be planning for 8 or 9. And, if you're looking at the cost in some of the ballparks here, and you look at our debt, even assuming a $4 billion each after incentives, 8 SMRs would result in doubling of the province's gross debt currently at 34.8 billion, of course, in this year. Big increases that we've seen there. My questions are, what have you assessed would be the implications for our province's credit rating?
We have no way of determining that. And that is far into the future and isn't pertinent to this year's budget.
Well, there's dollars being pulled away from the GRF and being dedicated towards a path on towards SMRs or other potential generation, and a lot of resources being discharged from this budget here this year down that path. And certainly SAS Power is going to be in a position where they need to make choices on this front. And so the question is one of the forecast here and on the debt side. And have you assessed what the debt implications would be when we're talking about that sort of capital? Just to flag that the minister from SAS Power told our team that the best place to go get those answers are over here with the Minister of Finance.
As you know, that we project out to 2028 and not beyond, and there won't be any SMR before 2028.
Well, I would urge much more focus on this front. I mean, our debt has increased in big ways already. We can't be driving with your eyes closed on these fronts. I mean, at some point, we need to step up to the power generation needs into the future. We have to assess the capital intensity of the options and hopefully choose the best option when it comes to affordable, reliable, sustainable power. But it doesn't engender a high level of trust or faith with a dedication of dollars into a fund right now, or just kind of going down that path without providing clarity and the business case and the economics and those answers back to people. Just looking at the debt forecast itself that was included in the 24-25 forecast of the 5-year debt forecast, can you advise whether so the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project with water security, it details some of the commitments in this budget in the out years, so I assume it's factored into the total debt that's there in this budget, factored in for 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28. But just to confirm, is the Diefenbaker irrigation project included there?
Just to address the member's preamble, I can assure him and his colleagues that we are constantly looking at the future and what the future will hold or cost, as well as addressing today and what the challenge of growth is as we plan on the province growing and the economy growing, and with that growth is how we will pay for the services in healthcare, education, and social safety nets. Unlike, I have yet to hear from the NDP members of a plan whatsoever of what they would do different. There's always criticism of don't save money for future power, but then complete 180 and say, but you're not planning for future power costs, all within less than 2 hours. There has been a number of suggestions of more spending that needs to be done with absolutely no plan on how that would be paid for by the members opposite. And I was there, quite frankly, elected when there was an NDP government, and taxes have gone down substantively when you look at the suite of taxes than when the NDP were in government. And there was little to no investment in capital. There was no new schools. There was school closures. There was no new hospitals. there were hospital closures. So
Was the just my I appreciate, Minister, and we can,
Sorry,
debate later.
I'll just let the minister finish here, please, because you did pack a lot into.
Question was, is the irrigation project included in the debt forecast numbers?
Right, so I'll allow that
Correct.
minister to contextualize that, please.
And I would ask the member office that if he doesn't want a rebuttal to his preamble, then he should discontinue the preamble. With that, the capital plan is in the budget and the irrigation project's in the capital plan.
Thanks for the irrigation project answer. So on the irrigation project, the debt forecast takes us to 27-28, $44 billion. Does that fully complete that project at that point, or how much more capital would be required after that?
Project?
Yeah.
That will be like a decade or more in the making.
And so, can you? How much is the debt is being added for the irrigation project? You described that it's included in the debt forecast for the years 24, 25, 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28, and of course through that 4-year period, it goes from $34.8 billion debt to $44.1 billion debt.
If you would turn to page 27 of your budget document, under Government Services, Dams and Water Supply Channels, you can see the numbers projected to 2028.
What percentage of completion does that require, or does that get that project to from a perspective?
It's the respective minister responsible.
Well, this is the Finance Committee, and it accounts for the debt, and there's a whole lot of debt that's being added, and I think we need to. This should be the place that we understand its implications. I guess to that front, of course, the debt's tripled under your government, and the government that's really struggled to balance the books. One balance out of the last seven years. And I won't get into some of all the mismanagement pieces, but what I do want to get a sense of is your concern around the debt load and then the debt servicing costs. And when I look to the budget, I understand, is it correct for me to look at the budget and see that this budget actually increases debt servicing costs in one fiscal year by approximately $100 million, from 800 and some million to over 900 million? And then if I look to the fiscal track and plan from this budget, in the course of 4 years, it looks like that debt servicing will then grow not just by 100 million, but that it would grow from 824 million to 1.264 billion. So you're talking about a 50% increase in just servicing that debt that's been stacked up there. Do I have those numbers correct, and does this concern the minister?
The 2024 budget projects a gross debt to be $34.8 billion, or a net debt to be $31.5, which the difference of $3.3 billion is attributed to the inclusion of sinking funds. And there are 3 categories of debt. There's the Crown debt, which will be $13.7 billion, and of course the Crown corporations have a business plan that through their rates they manage their debt, and they measure the health of their debt by debt to asset value ratios, and it has been relatively steady. The debt has gone up, but so has their asset value gone up substantively. There's the capital plan debt, of course, which can be equated to a mortgage, because it is money borrowed for a one-time project, such as a hospital, a school, a bridge, and that is projected to be $13.6 billion. Or if you take off the sinking funds, then it is $11.7 billion of net debt. That is absolutely for the infrastructure that has been built in this province because of a growing province, and I would be interested to know which hospital or which school, or the parkade here for the Regina General Hospital, or the urgent health centers that we're building, or what he wouldn't build, or which highway he wouldn't fix, what would he take off of that schedule in this year's budget, so that that debt would be, or that borrowing would be less. And of course, there's their operating debt, which is now at $7.5 billion, which is the debt that I have spoken publicly is the largest concern that I have, because that, of course, is borrowing in order to meet your day-to-day costs. Thankfully, due to the strength of our renewable resources, we have been able to bring that debt down by $2.5 billion over the last 2 budgets, rather than incorporate the money, which is basically one-time windfall, into day-to-day operating, which I was encouraged to do by members in your caucus. But the way you measure a government's health, financial health, of course, is through debt to GDP ratio. And the debt to GDP ratio in Saskatchewan is 14%. It is the second lowest in all of Canada. And I found it rather interesting going back, because I was elected for a number of years, and I was here when the NDP were in government. And yes, when the NDP were in government, the debt was lower. It is true. But in the last full year of an NDP government, the net debt to GDP ratio was 28.2, over double what it is today. So although debt was lower, it was not healthy. It was not as healthy as what it is today. The capital plan in this budget is 9 times the amount of what the final year of an NDP government was, because they just let everything deteriorate, or they closed it. So is debt always a concern to me? Yes. Do we discuss it in government? Yes. We also have the pressures of more students, so we need more classrooms, higher population, so we need more healthcare facilities. Our highways need to be maintained, and the highways are an economic driver for our economy. All of that needs to be taken into consideration. It needs to be balanced, and the health of that fiscal situation is measured by debt to GDP, second lowest in the country. With that, Mr. Chair, the officials have answers to the questions that they had promised to provide earlier.
Thanks.
The question that was asked there too, but wasn't answered. We've got limited time here too. Of course, debt's grown in a big way. So is debt servicing. It's gone up $100 million. It was $800 million. Now it's up $100 million over the next 5 years. Got a 50% increase on the amount we will be paying each and every year. My question was, do those costs and that trajectory concern this minister?
I answered that question. I said debt is always a concern. It needs to be managed. It needs to be managed carefully, and your debt health needs to be considered when you make decisions in a balanced way. What I can say, since I became finance minister, is we retired all of the double-digit interest rate debt that was brought in by the NDP. We only have single-digit interest rates now. With that, there are answers to questions.
So I guess I appreciate the answers, and then I have another question.
Yeah, I'll ask the officials to answer those questions, and I think we've got time for a few more questions, so we'll be good there.
Okay, thanks. So with respect to the forecast, the market dynamics in terms of supply, inventory, demand, and general benchmark pricing, for the oil sector, some of the private expert forecasts look at our BMO Financial Group, GLJ Associates, NYMEX Futures, Peters & Co. Limited, McDaniels & Associates, Scotiabank, Sproul Associates Limited, and TD Bank Financial Group. And then with respect to the potash forecast around global market dynamics, supplies, inventories, pricing, those sorts of things, there's a organization called CRU Group, which is an expert organization in mining dynamics globally in terms of marketing intelligence. Argus is another organization, as well as BMO. The producer data is fundamental to the forecasting, though, in Saskatchewan as well, because the royalties and the production taxes and so forth are based off of realized prices in Saskatchewan, so that is critical to understanding what they're expecting to see at the mine gate or at the wellhead and the operating costs that they have and those sorts of things. So those are fundamental inputs and potentially the most important.
Thanks very much for that information. The minister made a bit of a political rant there and was going after a government previous over 17 years ago now. And just to, remind folks and anyone watching us, she identified debt was much lower then, and that government really focused on bringing down debt to, GDP ratios. We were stuck with just a horrible situation from the Grant Devine government of the 1980s.
I'll interject here. I just remind Mr. Weatherspoon, I appreciate...
I listened to that, Chair.
I
listened to that, and we can respond. And we pay for that debt today because it's been debt that's been carried, right?
Mr. Weatherspoon, I'd ask you to move on to the estimates, please.
We're focused on the estimates. Debt is cumulative, so debt of Grant Devine was one heck of a mess left for the people of Saskatchewan. And I know that administration worked hard to get things back on track. The trajectory under the current government, well, it's been, back off to the races there. I know that if you assess debt in the province, historically, 95%, the debt's on our books in this budget, 95% of the debt has been accrued under a Conservative or a Sask Party Tory government. But let's focus in on a very important file where our voice matters in addressing fiscal fairness for the province, and it's one of equalization, where this province doesn't receive a fair shake on this front within the nation. It's one that I've brought up year after year in a steadfast way. It's one where the current government has been inconsistent in speaking to its importance. And I guess I would just identify, we had a good exchange last year, Minister, on this file. And unfortunately, the renewal of equalization had occurred at that point, so we're now in that 5-year agreement. But soon enough, we're going to be up upon its renewal. And kind of to those points at that time, we need to be consistent and principled in our entries for fiscal fairness. And, we've talked about the important improvements of how resource revenues are treated in an unfair way, or how hydroelectric revenues are treated in a way that aren't fair. We've talked about the importance of removing things like the fiscal capacity cap and the removal of the 3-year average. We also have talked about, a piece about more fair distribution of excess monies through a pool. But none of this will happen if we don't advance this with other provinces across Canada and with the federal government, and it's not going to get addressed if we wait until 2029 is upon us, or 2028. Anyways, it's a 5-year agreement. My question to the minister is, what actions has she undertaken in the last year, and what's planned in this fiscal year to advance the very important argument around fiscal fairness with respect to equalization for Saskatchewan?
There's very little opportunity to advance it with this particular federal government. And I will say this, in December, there was a federal, provincial, territorial meeting. The federal government decides the agenda. The provinces had put together suggestions for an agenda. And in fairness, the provinces are, they're not unified in seeing the equalization formula changed, because, of course, why would they? Because they are recipients. In particular, our neighbours to the east, I think, are getting close to $4 billion in equalization payments in Manitoba, and so they can afford things that we don't have that kind of privilege. Equalization was not allowed to be on the agenda. And getting a meeting with Minister Freeland is very challenging. And it's not just Saskatchewan, it is all of the provinces, all of the provinces.
Thanks for the update. It's just a file we need to lean into as a province, and we can't expect others to lead it. You know, we have the expertise here. We know it. We've got some allies in other provinces. We need to build out relationship and allies in others, and that's an important piece. And you know, obviously, this federal government's been poor on this. Previous one, I mean, Harper and his crew. I mean, they were completely not honest with Saskatchewan people on this front with their commitment. And it's well past time that we, have fiscal fairness from whatever federal government's going to be elected into the future. I guess to that end, obviously, I think the way to go about this is like on any file, but is being clear with any of those federal leaders. Certainly the Prime Minister, certainly the Conservative leader, sure the NDP leader too. But with respect to, I guess, Poilievre, the Conservatives, has there been, I think we need an undertaking that's even across the board, making clear the need for fiscal fairness and improvements on equalization. In your advocacy there, have you got a commitment from the federal Conservatives on this front?
No.
Thanks for that, Minister. I think if as many voices and many folks are clear on these interests with all parties, just like on other files, it's hopefully there'll be a chance for us to address the fiscal fairness piece for Saskatchewan. With respect to the trade offices that the government's established, are they governed by the same fiscal framework as ministries operating here in Regina? And if there are differences in financial operations of these offices versus a government office here in Saskatchewan, can you advise what those differences are?
You would have to ask the respective minister.
Okay, so and so then I guess this question, just let me know if it should be going somewhere else, but do those offices submit payment requests and accompanying documentation to the Ministry of Finance for issuing of payments, or where would those go? And are there petty cash accounts or checking accounts managed in these offices? And if so, could you describe?
That's all in trade and export.
Mr. Chair, I have an update on the fuel numbers. I know I gave you the PSTAR. We've got the fuel ones now. Accounts receivable for March 31st, at March 31st, 2024 for fuel is $26.2 million. And accounts receivable for March 31st, 2023 is $25.3 million.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Could you just profile the additional debt? I think it describes that there's $4.3 billion in debt being borrowed in this fiscal year of long-term debt. And could you just profile how much of that is being rolled over from prior years and how much is new debt? And then touch on the associated costs, the rates that and terms that Saskatchewan people what the terms of those agreements, or the terms of that debt, sorry.
If you turn to page 58 of the budget document, you will see in the general revenue fund operating, that's refinancing, so we're not borrowing additional dollars. So we're borrowing for the capital plan $1.9 billion. And then in the government business enterprises, We're borrowing $1.536.6 billion.
Thanks for that. I'm told by the chair I have time for one more tight question, and I'll end it with a positive note with a shout out to officials who do such good work on so many fronts. But the file that I've followed up over the years on, where there's been action, is that of e-commerce platforms that weren't being subjected to a fair tax. When you look at Saskatchewan retailers and local businesses that were paying that price. Could you update where we're at on this front? How much revenue was derived last year? What's forecast this year on this front? And identify some of the actions and progress that's been made on this front and any further steps that will be taken this year.
Before I turn it over to the officials, the shout out goes to Brent, who pushed this file and got us actually collecting from a number of online services. So, Brent.
Thank you, Minister. Just going back to last year when we updated it, we had 116 electronic organizations licensed. Actually, Nancy's group deserves kudos because for 23-24, we're now at 323, and they're actively working another 138 files in terms of e-commerce businesses delivering goods and services into the province. In terms of tax collections, in 22-23, we collected an additional incremental $90 million on goods and services coming in the province. In 23-24, our estimate or projection is $94.2 million. And overall, since we started the strategy, we've collected an incremental $255 million worth of taxes on those folks delivering goods and services into the province.
Thank you. For sure. Having reached our agreed upon time for consideration of finance today, we will adjourn consideration of these estimates. I would turn to you, Minister, if you have any closing comments you'd like to make.
I just need to thank my team, my officials. I couldn't do this without them, and they do an amazing job. So I thank them. I want to thank all the committee members for their time and the member for his questions.
Perfect. I would turn to Mr. Witherspoon. Do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair and committee members, but importantly to the Minister and the officials that are here. Without a doubt, we're blessed with exceptional finance officials leading the way for this province. It's evident in the responses from the officials that are here. I want to thank you and as well for the work that you're involved in and all those connected to that work. And to my sparring partner, the Minister, I know these are what could be her last estimates if she indeed doesn't run again, as she says she's not, and she's been in that role a long period of time. And I know I can only imagine the pressures and the sacrifices as well through that time. I know we've had lots of good hot debate on different issues, including here tonight, and all that that stands. That's how this place works and how we work to represent people. But to the Minister and for her service in her last estimates, I want to wish her well.
Great. Thank you. I'd ask the Minister if you require a brief recess to change out officials. We'll take
I'm
a
not changing
10-minute recess.
officials, but I may do something else.
Perfect. We will take a 10-minute recess.
Until the camera comes on. Okay.
Welcome back, Minister. Welcome back, officials, committee members. So we will move on to consideration of Bill number 156, the Tobacco Tax Amendment Act 2024. We'll begin our consideration with Clause 1, short title. Minister Harpower, please make your opening comments and introduce your officials.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to speak to you about amendments to the Tobacco Tax Act 1998. These amendments were introduced by the government in 2024-25 Saskatchewan budget announced on March 20th, 2024. This measure will help to combat flagrant abusers who are openly selling illicit tobacco and with no recourse for their actions. These amendments will strengthen Saskatchewan's ability to combat illicit tobacco and remain consistent with measures taken by other provinces. Mr. Chair, this bill introduces a requirement for tobacco retailers to be licensed to sell tobacco and to purchase tobacco from a licensed wholesaler. There is no cost for obtaining this license. The legislation includes 2 clarification amendments that will update the Ministry of Finance Revenue Division Enforcement Officer name to Revenue Investigator to better align with their responsibilities and to differentiate this group from the traditional law enforcement personnel, and to add a definition of person to provide stakeholders a better understanding of who the tax applies to. In addition, the legislation includes a related amendment to the Fuel Tax and Road Use Charge Act to update the enforcement officer name to Revenue Investigator. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present these legislative changes. I have a number of officials with me, and they will introduce themselves should they answer questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I guess I will just say the last thing before I turn it over for questions. Just remind officials or anyone else, please do not touch those mics. But with that, I would turn it to Mr. Witherspoon for questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I think the aims of this legislation, seem to make sense. I don't have a whole lot of questions. What I'm interested in is through your consultation or otherwise, have you had unintended consequences of how you're going about this raised that are a concern, or have you had direct concerns raised with you with respect to this legislation as well?
For that, I'm going to turn it to the officials. I personally, as the minister, haven't had consultations. This was brought forward by officials as a concern that needed to be addressed. So, Nancy? Yes.
Sure, introduce yourself. Nancy Perry, Assistant Deputy Minister of Revenue Division, Ministry of Finance. In our consultations on this work, we had full support from all the folks that we reached out to, and they were very pleased that there wouldn't be a charge or a fee for the license. So that was the one thing that we noted in our consultations.
Thanks. Can you describe the consultation you had with First Nations as well on this front?
In our consultations with the First Nations, their request was to have retailers be licensed because of the amount of contraband tobacco that was flowing through many of the retail locations. So they fully supported.
Were there any, not saying every concern is a valid one from anyone around the province, but has there been any concerns brought forward to ministry officials or the minister with respect to this legislation?
Perspective.
All right, that's it for me.
Well, seeing no more questions, we'll proceed to vote on the clauses. Clause 1, short title, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. It's right here. Clause 2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 6, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 7, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 9, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 10, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 11, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 12, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 13, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 14, is that agreed? Carried. And clause 15, is that agreed? Carried.
Clause 16.
And clause 16 coming into force, is that agreed? Carried.
Did you initial beside 16?
His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts the following: the Tobacco Tax Amendment Act 2024. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 156, the Tobacco Tax Amendment Act 2024, without amendment. Mr. Bonk moves. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. We'll now move to consideration of Bill number 156, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2024. We'll begin our consideration with Clause 1, short title. Minister Harpower, please make your opening comments and introduce any officials, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here today to discuss Bill number 7, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2024. This legislation implements the income tax initiative that was announced on March 20th, 2024, as part of the 2024-25 provincial budget. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to announce that this legislation maintains the small business tax rate reduction at 1% for one more year to June 30th, 2025, to provide further support to small businesses and allow owners to reinvest in their businesses. This will benefit small businesses in Saskatchewan with a savings of $56 million in corporate income tax. In total, since small business tax rate was lowered in the fall of 2020, Saskatchewan small businesses will save an estimated $416 million in corporate income tax. In addition, this initiative will result in Saskatchewan continuing to be tied for having the second lowest small business tax rate in Canada. And when combined with Saskatchewan's small business threshold of $600,000, the highest in Canada, Saskatchewan's tax environment will remain very competitive. Mr. Chair, the bill also proposes a technical update to the provincial income tax legislation by amending the dividend tax credit in response to changes to the small business rate, which is intended to remove differences in tax payable because of a choice in business or income earning structure. This will maintain integration between the corporate and personal income tax systems. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present this legislation changes today and would be ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Minister. I would open up the questions. Mr. Witherspoon.
Thanks, Minister. Obviously, we support not hiking this tax as would have been the plan. So we're supportive of holding the small business tax rate at 1%. Just is there, with respect to your consultations and your work with stakeholders, have any unintended consequences or any concerns been identified with the way this legislation was put together or its impact?
No, and there was very positive response to this. Undoubtedly, you know, when I'm talking CFIB and Chamber and whatnot that I've met with, they would like to see it 0, but they are quite pleased that we're holding at 1%.
And can you just describe a little bit for the public how the offset works? So what the subsequent changes on the dividend tax credit? I have trouble putting it into simple terms, but it's fairly straightforward. It's and it's the point of making sure that the impact is neutral, if you will here. If you could just offer a bit of greater...
I would, but I will mess it up, so I'm going to get the officials to answer that.
So at a high level, corporate income tax and personal income tax do have some interactions, and they're integrated in some ways. So with respect to the dividend tax credit, the purpose is to avoid double taxation, whereby income would be taxed under corporate income tax, and then if there's dividends distributed to shareholders, recognizing that corporate income tax that's already been applied on that, and therefore not applying it on the personal income tax side as well. So that's what the credit is intended to do, is to basically maintain that integration and fair taxation, or not double taxation of income.
That I recall going through this discussion and getting a good understanding of that last time we supported a reduction on this front. Everything else looks straightforward. I mean, the obvious points are that, you know, this is holding the line at 1%. Obviously, to anyone observing this and to, you know, people and businesses across the province, I would, you know, continue to identify that as the official opposition. We will continue to push and call for reduction to the PST that's been stuck on so many goods. And, you know, of course, now the PST has tripled in the take into the provincial budget, going from $1 billion to $3 billion, and applies to so many other goods and services, and really has a real impact on cost of living, everything from children's clothes to insurance and used cars and so much more. I'll make those points unless the minister's open to amendments to add a couple of those items in here tonight. I suspect that's not the case, just looking to the minister.
I suspect due to the lack of understanding, it's a different act. For the member opposite, because he doesn't have the experience.
I'm just glad that we don't have more tax hikes coming from this minister, because that's it's a rare occasion that we have a holding the line at 1.
All right.
But I'll turn it over back to the chair. I don't have any further questions.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you very much for that. And seeing no more questions, we'll proceed to vote on the clauses. Clause 1, short title. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Agreed.
Carried.
Carried. Clause 5, coming into force, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts the following: the Income Tax Act, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2024. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 157, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2024, without amendment. Mr. Harrison moves. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Take the bill, please.
We'll now turn to our final bill. That's Bill number 159, the Revenue and Financial Services Amendment Act 2024. We'll begin our consideration with Clause 1, short title. Mr. Harpar, please make your opening comments and introduce any officials.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to speak to you about amendments to the Revenue and Financial Services Act. These amendments were included by the government in the 2024-25 Saskatchewan budget announced on March 20th, 2024. These amendments implement measures to address flagrant abusers who avoid paying the consumption taxes they have collected from consumers but refuse to remit. The changes contained in the bill, along with proposed changes to the Tobacco Tax Act and associated regulations, are expected to generate incremental annual tax revenue of about 50 to 60 million once fully implemented. To implement this initiative, specific amendments to the Revenue and Financial Services Act are required to enhance collection powers to collect from individuals and businesses who are trying to shield themselves from collection action, to enhance penalties to increase compliance, to prevent tax avoidance, and clarify obligations and simplify language to reduce opportunities for clients to behave in ways that are unintended by legislation. The legislation includes consequential amendments to import an immunity provision from several associated revenue statutes into the Revenue and Financial Services Act. These changes are to come into force October 1st, 2024, unless otherwise noted. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present these legislative changes, and I will be ready to answer questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Weatherspoon, any questions, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much. This all seems to be fairly straightforward and well-intended and sort of improvements and sort of housekeeping in nature. So I don't have a whole lot of questions here. I guess just again, as well-intended as legislation can be, you want to make sure that it's as effective as it can be and that the tools are in place that are needed to ensure enforcement on this front and to ensure that everyone's paying their fair taxes. I think the important thing to understand is if one person isn't paying their fair share, someone else, the rest of everyone else is paying a little bit too much. With respect to your process and your consultation on this front, have you heard of any concerns in this legislation or any suggestions to improve it?
Correct. And again, this was concerns and issues brought forward by the officials and their experience, so I will turn to them. My office did not conduct consultations.
Thanks for the question. Due to the measures that we are planning on implementing, we did not do significant consultation on these measures. What we did was interjurisdictional reviews to see what measures were in place in other provinces and brought our legislation up to date, or attempting to bring our legislation up to date with the changes that have been made in other provinces. And we also consulted greatly with the Ministry of Justice in terms of the effectiveness of some of the tools that we may be bringing in.
Now, does this interact at all with the interesting file we were talking about a little while ago about those e-commerce platforms that we've discussed over the years in the out-of-province e-commerce platforms where there's been this pursuit of tax fairness and so many platforms that have been brought online, testament to the work of the officials. Does this interact with those folks, or what other tools do we have legislative to ensure enforcement?
I'll answer initially. No, well, only if they collected it and then didn't remit it is what this is addressing. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Generally, we don't have
Generally, with those types of files, once they've become registered and licensed with us, they are fairly compliant. But generally, this would cover any taxpayer that is licensed or not licensed and has a balance owing to the province.
I had questions earlier about tax in the estimates around tax arrears. What impact do you feel this will have around tax arrears?
We would expect it to bring it down. As we indicated, we expect this to generate 50 to 60 million annually once it's fully implemented.
Could you give a timeline that's positive? Can you give us a timeline towards those fiscal outcomes?
There's some, obviously, staffing that we need to do in terms of bringing on some new resources to help with some of this work, and just building out the processes associated with it. Our plan right now within the division is between 18 and 24 months to have most things in place. And some of these tools may not get utilized very frequently. You know, they're really just for the situations where we're having difficulty or challenges with a particular taxpayer. So they may take some time to have us operationalize them.
And I'm not sure if this question pertains directly to these changes or this piece of legislation, but there's been concerns identified, I know, with the minister and myself, with folks around workers that have inappropriately characterized themselves as incorporated themselves or as a contractor. I think examples of that would be in the trucking industry that's been brought, I know, to the government and ministers and to me as well. And I know some of this relates directly with the federal government as well. And I know there's been concerns as well with some in the trades, for example, on this front as well, where the way workers have incorporated, as has been described to me, inappropriately or illegally. Does this address that? And if not, are there any other undertakings of this government to address those behaviors?
This doesn't address it. I haven't had any conversation with other ministers on that issue, but that's not to say that there aren't the more relevant ministers and their officials aren't working on it. So I can't say it's not being viewed. I just know I'm not.
I have no further questions with respect to this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Witherspoon. Seeing there are no more questions, we'll proceed to vote on the clauses. Clause 1, short title, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 6, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 7, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 9, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 10, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 11, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 12, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 13, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 14, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 15, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 16, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 17, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 18, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 19, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 20, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 21, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 22, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 23, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 24, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 25, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 26, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 27, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 28, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 29, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 30, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 31, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 32, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 33, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 34, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 35, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 36, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 37, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 38, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 39, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 40, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 41, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 42, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 43, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 44, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 45, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 46, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 47, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 48, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 49, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 50, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 51, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 52, is that agreed?
Coming into force.
Sorry.
52.
Clause 52 coming into force, is that agreed? Carried. His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts the following: the Revenue and Financial Services Amendment Act 2024. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 159, the Revenue and Financial Services Amendment Act 2024, without amendment. Mr. Jensen moves. Is that agreed? Carried. With that, I would turn to the Minister if you have any closing comments here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I thank the officials, I thank the committee members, and I thank the member for his very thoughtful questions.
Perfect. And I would turn to Mr. Weatherspoon. Do you have any closing comments?
Just thanks to the chair and the minister and all the officials for the time here tonight. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And with that, I provide an opportunity for officials to leave while the committee votes on the resolutions.
Go ahead.
We will now proceed to vote on the committee resolutions. We'll begin with vote 18, Finance. Central Management and Services subvote FIO01 in the amount of $8,573,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Yeah, initial right there. Perfect, yeah.
Provincial Comptroller subvote FI03 in the amount of $10,236,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Treasury Management subvote FI04 in the amount of $3,082,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Revenue subvote FI05 in the amount of $27,495,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Budget analysis subvote FI06 in the amount of $7,566,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Miscellaneous payment subvote FI08 in the amount of $22,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Pensions and benefits subvote FI09 in the amount of $215,008,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Personnel Policy Secretariat subvote FI10 in the amount of $532,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Research and Development Tax Credit subvote FI12 in the amount of $5 million. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
That's fine.
Financial Programs subvote FI13 in the amount of $2,700,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustments in the amount of $2,626,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted.
Just a little initial there too. Read this.
Okay. Finance vote 18, $280,214,000.
Should probably say dollars next time.
I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2025, the following sums for finance in the amount of $280,214,000. Mr. Bradshaw.
Okay, you got me this.
Is that agreed?
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, so we can just sign right here.
Right here? Full signature?
Finance, yeah.
Yep. So with all those, should we say dollars on every one of those? Is it that? Yeah, okay, just tell me. Did I say carried on that one?
Yeah.
We'll now move to vote 12, Finance, Debt Servicing. Debt Servicing subvote FD01 in the amount of $623,900,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Crown Corporation Debt Servicing Sub-Vote FD02 in the amount of $42,800,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Finance Debt Servicing Vote 12, $666,700,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Now turn to vote 33, Public Service Commission. Central Management and Services Sub-Vote PS01 in the amount of $5,189,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Human Resource Consulting Services Sub-Vote PS03 in the amount of $9,115,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Employee Relations and Strategic Human Resource Services Sub-Vote PS04 in the amount of $8,723,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Human Resource Service Center Sub-Vote PS06 in the amount of $10,737,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $305,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. Public Service Commission, vote 33, $33,764,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2025, the following sums for Public Service Commission in the amount of $33,764,000. Mr. Bonk, is that agreed? Carried. Vote 13, SAS Builds and Procurement. Central Management and Services Sub-Vote SP01 in the amount of $56,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Property Management Sub-Vote SP02 in the amount of $3,211,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Project Management Sub-Vote SP03 in the amount of $0. Is that agreed? Carried. Transportation, Other Services Sub-Vote SP05 in the amount of $551,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Major Capital Asset Acquisition Sub-Vote SP07 in the amount of $84,575,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Information Technology Sub-Vote SP11 in the amount of $38,560,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan Sub-Vote SP13 in the amount of $4,330,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Infrastructure and Procurement sub-vote SP14 in the amount of $25,513,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $1,309,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. SAS Bills and Procurement, vote 13, $156,740,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2025, the following sums for SAS Bills and Procurement in the amount of $156,740,000. Mr. Harrison, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Sign right here. SAS Bills and Procurement.
Vote 86, SAS Bills Corporation. SAS Bills Corporation sub-vote SB01 in the amount of $0. Is that agreed? Carried. SAS Bills Corporation, vote 86, $0. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2025, the following sums for SAS Bills Corporation in the amount of $0. Mr. Jensen moves. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried.
There's no resolution.
Vote 155, Lotteries and Gaming Saskatchewan Corporation. Loan sub-vote LO01 in the amount of $0. There is no vote as this is statutory.
So just sign right here. And sign right here.
Full signature.
Yep, full signature. Okay.
Vote 151, Municipal Finance Corporation of Saskatchewan. Loan sub-vote MF01 in the amount of $30 million. There is no vote as this is statutory.
Yep. And sign.
Vote 152, Saskatchewan Power Corporation. Loan sub-vote PW01 in the amount of $977,200,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Vote 153, Saskatchewan Telecommunications Holding Corporation. Loan sub-vote ST01 in the amount of $216,100,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Vote 140, Saskatchewan Water Corporation. Loan sub-vote SW01 in the amount of $33,500,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. vote 150 Sask Energy Incorporated, loans subvote SE01 in the amount of $279,800,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Vote 175 debt redemption. Debt redemption vote 175 in the amount of $1,329,257,000. There is no vote as this is statutory.
Initial here.
Initial.
Yep. And then sign beside debt redemption.
Vote 176, sinking fund payments, government share. Sinking fund payments, government share, vote 176 in the amount of $460,000. There is no vote as this is statutory.
Right here. And then sign beside sinking fund.
Vote 177, interest on gross debt, Crown Enterprise share. Interest on gross debt, Crown Enterprise share, vote 177 in the amount of $0. There is no vote as this is statutory.
And a full signature here. And we're going to move on to the supplementary estimates. Just one sec.
So we'll move on to the 2023-24 supplementary estimates. Number 2, vote 18, finance. Pensions and benefits subvote FI09 in the amount of $2,074,000. There is no vote as this is statutory.
Initial right here.
Financial program subvote FI13 in the amount of $1,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Right here.
Financial vote 18, $1,000.
Right across here.
Okay.
Finance vote here. Right here.
Okay, yep, no problem. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for finance in the amount of $1,000. Mr. Bonk moves. Is that agreed? Carried. Vote 13, SAS Builds and Procurement. Major Capital Asset Acquisition, Subvote SP07 in the amount of $8,995,000. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. SAS Bills and Procurement, Vote 13, $8,995,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for SAS Bills and Procurement in the amount of $8,995,000. Mr. Harrison. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. And vote 175 debt redemption. Debt redemption vote 175 in the amount of $14,542,000. There is no vote as this is statutory. Committee members, you have before you a draft of the 10th report of the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. We require a member to move the following motion, that the 10th report of the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies be adopted and presented to the Assembly. Mr. Bradshaw.
It's okay. Say, is that agreed?
He doesn't have to read. Okay. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried.
Sign, date, and write carried on this.
Okay. Anywhere?
Yep. Sign these tomorrow.
Sure, yep.
Okay.
No problem.
But that's okay. Sign
I sign them right now?
Yep.
No date.
No, it's dated.
Well, that concludes our business for today. I would ask a member to move a motion of adjournment. Mr. Jensen has moved. All agreed? Agreed. Carried. This committee stands adjourned to the call of the chair.